And joining us now is Tarek Fatah, author of Chasing a Mirage, The Tragic Illusion of an Islamic State. It's always great to see you here at TVO, Tarek. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Let's get to the nub of this book, which is the difference between creating a state of Islam rather than creating an Islamic state. That's the big distinction.
Yes.
Help us understand what you see to be the distinction there.
One is to inculcate within oneself the teachings of the Quran and the examples of Prophet Muhammad, to be a better person, to use religion as a moral compass to conduct one's life with one's family. The other is to use the same principles and create control over populations and establish political environments or countries or caliphates or kingdoms where the caliph or the king or the sultan could control and oppress the people and retain his familial hierarchy and dynasty by invoking God, Islam, and the Prophet.
And just the way you've described it, I'm guessing you're more in favor of the former rather than the latter. Yes, that's what the book is about. Yes. Let me read an excerpt from the book, and this will get us off to the races here. With political power as the ultimate goal for most dynasties in Islamic history, and even present-day regimes, Islam became merely a convenient method to acquire or hold on to authority. Whether it was from the pulpit or the throne, opponents from within the faith were almost invariably declared as enemies of Islam and killed. Of course, this was not exclusive to Muslim dynasties. The difference is that while most of humanity has come to recognize the futility of racial and religious states, the Islamists of today present this sordid past as their manifesto of the future. And my one-word question is, why?
Because when they look around themselves, they see nothing in the present or in the future where they can see their own contributions. So if you are a Muslim or who considers himself separate from the rest of the world, then one is isolated. Then whether it is the car or the refrigerator or the television screen, or whether the pen or the styles or the languages or the books or the printing press, everything is from the other. And therefore, the only thing that you have is your past. And you cling on to that past for your identity's sake. The Muslim, on the other hand, that has a state of Islam within him or herself, believes himself or herself to be part of the human race. And therefore, the Wright brothers are as much part of my identity as is the person who invented insulin at the UFT, or the Hindus of 2,000 years ago who created mathematics, or the Gupta dynasty is mine.
Well, let me follow up on your identity bit. You're from Pakistan originally, right?
Yes.
Let me ask about Pakistan, because it is, I think it's the only state conceived as an Islamic state.
Yes.
Not what you want, but in fact as an Islamic state. And you've described it in the book, this is your original home country, as a failure. Why?
Because it was a massive deception carried out on very innocent people who were marginalized. And the end result is the evidence. The country broke up into two within 25 years. It started with what some would call a genocide, where 1 million people in Punjab and Bengal slaughtered each other, Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. And it's almost never talked about because it's too traumatic. It happened in a 6-month period. 25 years later, fairer-skinned Punjabis of my ancestry went to East Pakistan, and when the one-year war ended, 1 million Bengali Muslims were dead. Is that not a failure?
That's history. What about today? Is it still a failure today?
When I was writing this book, it was a failure. What happened in the elections gives me great hope, because the people of Pakistan delivered a crushing blow to the Islamists, and secular center-right and center-left parties got elected, formed a coalition government, and defeated every supporter of bin Laden and the Taliban, even in the Northwest Frontier province, with deep accommodation with each other. The opposition and the government of the past are now sitting today with all their differences. They talk to each other, and they have learned a big lesson, because both the leaders were exiled in North America, England, or the Middle East, and they knew that India's success is because of accommodation and lack of violence. And Pakistan's failure was because of a self-righteous attitude that we are the chosen country and what they call the pillar of Islam. And whereas the Indian Muslims were thriving, the Pakistani Muslims were failing.
Let me ask you about some other Muslims. I think I'm right in saying that Islam started among the Arab peoples of the world. And yet, if you look at one of the most Islamist regimes in the world, I guess, you'd have to look at Iran.
Yes.
They are not Arabs at all.
Of course they are Arab ruled.
Okay.
The head of the Islamic Republic of Iran cannot be a person of Iranian ancestry. The law says that unless and until you can prove your ancestry to a Meccan Arab family of the Quraysh tribe of the Hashemite subclan of the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, you cannot be a ruler of Iran. Now, most Persians might not know that, but you are identified by the color of your turban in the 21st century.
Well, if that's the case, how can this religion have such a stronghold over that country?
Because the religion of Persian Islam was way different than the religion of the Ayatollahs today. Persian Islam is what gave Islam its robust attitude and its ability to even stand up in the court of the Caliph and say there is no God, and yet offer a glass of fine Baghdad wine and live to tell the story. Homosexuality, even promiscuity, live side by side with piety and piousness. That was what Persian Islam gave to Arab Islam, and Turkish soldiery and Indian intellect combined to create what was a great dynasty, and where people would migrate from Europe and Africa to live under Muslim rule. Today, do you know any Muslim who's applying for citizenship or immigration to Iran or Saudi Arabia? Even one in Canada?
I'm going to assume that's a rhetorical question, and you're not expecting an answer from me. Well, let me play a clip for you here.
Yes.
Tarek, this is, there's I think, a fairly broad assumption in the Western world, or most of the Western world, that the doctrine of separation of church and state is a pretty good idea. Here's Mark Lilla from Columbia University talking about this. Michael, roll tape, please.
We convince ourselves sometimes that there is a process at work in world history, that there's some kind of secularization taking place first in the West and then trickling out into the rest of the world. It's a narcissistic idea. It's not only incorrect when it comes to our own history, but it also has nothing to do with the history of political thought and political practice elsewhere.
Lilla goes on to argue that this notion of the separation of church and state is a result of a unique set of circumstances which took place in the western half of Christendom over 1,000+ years, and there is absolutely nothing inevitable or inexorable about it anywhere else in the world. Do you agree with that?
I think he needs to take a visa and visit India and stay there for at least 6 months on a sabbatical, and then come back, visit Pakistan, and take a look at the Baloch movement, the Pashtun Islamist movement, the Punjabis. He has never met a Sikh and a Muslim and a Hindu Punjabi chatting away over a cup of coffee in Lahore or Amritsar. It's so sad that this knowledge of academics in the United States, I think it is more out of white guilt that they come out and say, well, Muslims are a strange people. Why should they accept values of the West? These are not values of the West. These are values coming from Greece. These are values coming from Baghdad. These are values coming from India. These are values ingrained in humanity, that when we need each other's blood, we don't ask, what religion is your blood? We have the A type or the O type.
But he says it's not inevitable, and I guess you say it is?
It is inevitable. If we have to survive on this, and if it is not inevitable, we have to fight to make it as practical as possible, as it is in Canada, where our example should be given to the rest of the world, where our founding fathers, the Quebecois and the Anglos, have reconciled of how to deal with each other despite profound differences and killings with each other. The Macpaps that went to fight in the Spanish Civil War represented the Mackenzie and the Papineau traditions of Anglo and French Canada and fought in Spain. We in Canada have the answer. The United States academics should not be lecturing our populations as to what to do. They have a problem there with George Bush pushing religion into and asking Obama to identify whether he's a Muslim or not. We don't have this issue over here.
Let me read an excerpt from a book called Islam and the Challenge of Democracy. For Islam, the author says, democracy poses a formidable challenge. Muslim jurists have argued that a law made by a sovereign monarch is illegitimate because it substitutes his authority for God's sovereignty. But law made by sovereign citizens faces the same problem of legitimacy. In Islam, God is the only sovereign and the only source of legitimate law. How then can a democratic conception of the people's authority be reconciled with an Islamic understanding of God's authority? Are there any conditions, I ask therefore, under which there could ever be a successful Islamic State?
It could be a state where Muslim are majority in Islam is a character, like Israel has a Jewish character, Canada has a Christian character. Canada is not a Christian state. So Pakistan can be an Islamic state, but the Hindus of Canada would have the right to be the rulers of that state if the people decided. India is an example. The Prime Minister is a Sikh. The President was a Muslim. Nobody even asked the question that 80% of the population is Hindu. And this notion that jurists have decided, who appointed these jurists? Who gave them the right to lecture me or anyone else as to what the law is? The names of these qazis and the Jews, these all came in the 8th and 9th century, about 100 and 200 years after the Prophet had died, after he said his last word, revelation of the Quran, today I have completed your faith for you. I don't know what part of that line these jurists don't understand, because 99% of their law and the Sharia that they want us Muslims to follow or introduce into Canada came after the death of the Holy Prophet.
Okay, you're taking us back, so let's go there.
Yes.
You talk about the Golden Age, and you tell us that the Golden Age of Islam, in your view, is a fake. It's actually a myth that there was no well, you want to describe the Golden Age for us?
I don't know, it's a mythology, because as soon as the Prophet died, the knives came out. The first civil wars happened within a year of the Prophet dying. The first assassinations and beheading of practicing Muslims took place by some of our most celebrated heroes. Khalid bin Walid slaughtered and cut off the head of a pious Muslim, and all he asked was, I don't recognize Abu Bakr, the successor of the Prophet, to be the legitimate ruler. He wasn't saying I deny the Prophet or the Quran or God, but he was killed. The first civil wars happened between the wife of the Prophet and his favorite person and his son-in-law and cousin, Ali.
No, you chronicle in tremendous detail all of the bloodshed and the beheadings, and I mean, it was a very violent time. Is that what young Muslim children are taught in their schools about this Golden Age of Islam?
They're not taught the gory details. They are told, first of all, 80% of Muslims don't speak Arabic, so 80% of the Muslims, by and large, are told, you don't know the real Islam because you're not Arab, you can't speak Arabic. So the main victims of this are the Indo-Pakistani Muslim diaspora, who try to look Arabized, take on Arabic last names, and then, because they are told, but being Indian is anti-Islamic, they look for a new identity in Canada. And therefore, you see young Indo-Pakistani Muslim girls not wearing the Pakistani headdress, but the Egyptian headdress. So they are not aware of the history of this bloodshed in an honest manner. In the Quran, God demands of Muslims to speak the truth, even if it hurts you and your family. And yet, the truth, when it is told, elicits a prompt response of either apostasy to a practicing Muslim of color, or if it's a white person, the accusation of racism. And therefore, there is no debate going on over there. And therefore, despite the fact that the Islamists know that I'm right, they will not debate me on this issue.
Well, they don't even acknowledge you're a part of this, right?
They will say that to my face that you are right, but why did you go and discuss it with Steve Bacon?
They're not going to acknowledge to your face that you're right. There's no Islamist I know of who would go to your face and say, Tarek, we know you're really right.
No, that's not. I haven't written it. I didn't live in the 8th century. I've taken what's written by Tabari, by medieval historians, that they quote. The 5 founding members of the Islamic theology, the 5 imams, including the 4 Sunni and the 1 Shia, were all imprisoned, all tortured, and some were assassinated and killed by the caliphs and sultans of that time.
Well, let me read a quote from your book here. My question to the Islamists who portray this period as a golden age of Islam is this. What aspect of this power struggle, the gory murders and punishments and palace coups, do they feel is relevant for Muslims in the 21st century? If this was the best of Muslim traditions, why would we wish to emulate them? How strong is this cry for a return to the so-called golden age of Islam and the ideals of the 7th century?
It wasn't there till the 19th century. This is a product of the 20th century and the defeat of the Ottoman Caliphate and the resurgence of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and in India, the Jamaat Islami. And the 2 founders of these are Maududi, the late Sayyid Abul Ala Maududi of India, and Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb of Egypt. And they reinvented this whole notion of how to fight colonialism by reenacting the pride of the great dynasties of all times. Today in Toronto, in the schools and universities, you can get books by Maududi and Qutb being distributed that tell these young people that countries like Canada are the enemy, the Darul Harb, and that if you want to be a true Muslim, you have to conduct yourself in armed jihad against the infidel. But when they come on your show, they will say, oh, jihad is internal struggle. Yes, yeah. Ask them, what is the lower jihad? The Prophet did say that the greater jihad is to struggle against yourself. My question is, why are you distributing books by Maududi and Sayyid Qutb in our campuses, in our schools, and yet coming on shows and lying about it and saying that, no, we don't want a jihad against anyone?
Well, tell me, that why do they not see the inconsistency between the free rights to practice their religion, to speak freely, to assemble freely, etc., that they enjoy in a Western society, on the one hand, and on the other hand, this great, apparently heartfelt desire to recreate the caliphate in which surely all of those rights would disappear?
90% of the Muslims are associated with no mosque. 90% of Muslims don't go regularly to prayers, just like Christians and Jews. But the Muslims who are moderate, who are slightly liberal, secular yet practicing, pay a very heavy price because they have assimilated and embraced Canadian society. So people like me don't look like Muslims. So who does the media or the politician talk to? Are men and women who wear religion on the sleeve and are that 10% that control the mosques. And for them, I go back to that notion. When they look around, they see nothing which is their contribution. When I look around, I see everything as my contribution, because for me, whether you're Zoroastrian or Jewish or Hindu or Christian or Muslim, I'm part of you.
I want to follow up on what was perhaps the single most important episode on this topic in Ontario history, which was when, ironically enough, on 9/11, not the 9/11, but September 11th, 2005, the current Premier of Ontario put his foot down and said, we will not have Sharia law in this province as an option for some people in the Islamic community who want to use it for family disputes.
And God bless him for that.
You say God bless him for that, but in the long run, tell me why you think he made the right call.
Because he was one of the few Western politicians that stood up to Islamists and the blackmail that we will defeat you in the next election in that constituency. Read the reaction of every Islamist after 9/11, 2005. What did they say? We will teach a lesson to the Liberal Party of Ontario. We will defeat them. The same guys were at the Liberal Party convention in Montreal dictating to the leadership candidates, we will tell you if you have halal breakfast with us, who's going to be the next leader of the Liberal Party. They blackmailed each one of the 4 leaders. Some of them didn't buy this. Dalton McGuinty stood up, exactly like how Bob Rae stood up and embraced Salman Rushdie when he came over here. We have brave politicians.
Well, I'm going to stop you here,
Yes.
because there was a difference. Bob Rae did get up on stage and link arms with Salman Rushdie in public for the cameras to see. And it was a very public moment. You would remember, you worked for Bob Rae at the time.
Yes, yes.
Dalton McGuinty, very quietly, in an interview with, I think, a broadcast news reporter, he didn't call a press conference, he didn't make a public announcement. He kind of mentioned it as an aside on a Sunday to a BN reporter that, oh, incidentally, Sharia, not on. And that was it. There was no big courageous public stand.
I'll tell you, because Dalton McGuinty is not Bob Rae.
Even though they're in the same party now.
Of course they are. I'm in the same party. I'm not one of those. But I'm saying that by world standards, Canada, from its conservatives to its New Democrats to its liberals, has some of the finest people. They're not as charismatic as Galloway or Ken Livingston or anyone, but we have the best statesmen in the world running our affairs, and Canada, that is why Canada is a model.
Okay, but tell me this, Tarek, why do you feel, one thing we learned at the time was, in other faith communities, they do have religious laws or religious tenets which are occasionally adhered to by adherents of the religion as options available to members of their community to resolve disputes.
I have no problem with the...
Well, except that the Premier then said no for Sharia and Muslims.
Yes.
Why did you feel it was so important to prohibit this as an option for the Muslim community when the option heretofore had existed for other faith-based communities?
The other faith-based communities took advantage of this because in 1991, when this law was brought in, it was brought in as a cost-cutting measure by the Bobry government because of the recession. Nobody knew that there were smart enough clerics in all religions who knew how to capitalize on a problem and make an advantage for themselves. The difference between Hindus, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and the Islamist leadership is that the Hindus and the Jews are not asking for the creation of a Jewish state in Canada. None of these other religions are saying, use the Torah or the Gita to create parliamentary laws. The difference is that in the 12th and 13th century, these guys were saying that. The Catholic Church, even up to the 60s, the Duplessis era in Quebec, they were saying, we will tell you what the law should be.
Okay, well, let me play devil's advocate here. If we call ourselves a multicultural society where we respect everybody's customs from the old country,
No, I don't respect every custom, sorry.
I know you don't, but I'm saying our political leaders and our society in general, you know, if we call ourselves a multicultural society, do we not have to put some of our money where our mouths are in this kind of a situation?
Absolutely, but we stand up against cultures that are self-defeating. Cultures that permit women to have female genital mutilation should be rejected. Cultures that say that you can have 4 wives should be rejected. Cultures that say that the wife has to jump into the funeral pyre of a dying husband have to be rejected. And cultures that say that handicapped people deserve a parking lot should be celebrated unapologetically. And this notion that every culture is equal, I don't buy that. I am for multi-racism and a multi-racial society where races are equal. Races have to be equal. Cultures cannot be equal for a simple reason that the culture of Canada has evolved out of many other cultures. Europe itself, which is the defining character of North America, over 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th century, has changed. The French and American revolutions have changed entirely how Europeans see themselves and took a different direction and left behind almost 10,000 years of their evolution.
Then explain this to me. Why is it that, and obviously I'm not going to make the vast overgeneralization here, but you do see this in some cases in the Muslim communities in Ontario. You see the parents who are first-generation Canadian, who are making the effort, one might say, to assimilate and enjoy Canadian values and so on. But then you see their children becoming much more orthodox in their adherence to and observance of Muslim traditions and tenets. Why is that happening?
There's nothing wrong in people being orthodox or conservative in their approach to religion. That should not be opposed. It is the politicization of that religion that is a problem. And it is not happening in the Muslim youth. It is happening in a segment of the Muslim youth. Arab youth or Iranian youth are not getting radicalized. It is Indo-Pakistani, South Asian youth that are getting radicalized. Is it a coincidence that all the accused in Great Britain are either Indian, Pakistani, or converts? When did you last hear of an Iranian or an Arab young guy in Toronto or over there getting involved in this? They're comfortable in their ethnic origins. Iranians, Turks, Kosovars, Arabs, Egyptians, Palestinians, they party, they're having a good time in this country.
So why the South Asians?
Because the South Asians have been told that you are not actually Indians. The children born on the Indus River are being told you're not Indians. And being Indian is un-Islamic. The hatred spread against the Hindu and the Sikh in the minds of young Muslim Indian Pakistani youth is criminal. It should be banned, and it is being done. I don't think even the Hindus and Sikhs know that they are being hated by a segment of the youth. But I know my upbringing as a child in Pakistan, I was told that a Hindu and a Sikh are unclean people.
Let's, in our remaining moments, talk about what to do now. And I'm going to read another excerpt from your book to get that started. A bit of honesty, you tell us, would go a long way. The Muslim malaise is not the result of a Zionist U.S. conspiracy. It is the inability of the Muslim leadership to realize that the days of emirs and caliphs belongs to the past. It is the failure of our scholars and clerics to reconcile Islam with modernity, individual freedom and liberty. As long as we continue to blame others for our shortcomings, we will continue to stagnate. My fellow Muslims, you say, we have got to grow up. Let us stop chasing a mirage. Let's unpack this a bit here. Why the predisposition, in your view, to blame others for the predicament of the community?
It's the easiest path of least resistance. It's so easy. You have a kingdom of Saudi Arabia with 5,000 princes running a country of immense wealth, cannot even compete with India with burgeoning poverty and 1 billion people with no oil, and yet we have to ask this why? Can you imagine 5,000 princes ruling France with not a single princess in power? Can you imagine someone ruling Germany who says, I'm the supreme leader of Germany and yesterday God told me, kill 25 people? That's what's happening in Iran. Pakistan, because of its Indian character, is a century ahead of the rest of the Muslim world. Look at Indonesia. We have democracy there, but the heartland, the Persians and the Arabs and the Turks have to get up and follow the path set by Ataturk. Abdul Razik, the early 20th century scholar, who said, we don't need the caliphate. We need the printing press. We need electricity, mechanized agriculture, and industry. What did the imams give them? A search looking around the world for a caliphate?
Okay, I understand it's always easier to blame somebody else than to look within. But why so few voices, relatively speaking, urging what you are urging, namely to look within, reform within, modernize, grow up, as you put it?
I will contest your argument that there are few, because Pakistan's election defines us that there are not few. However, there are 3 points in the Muslim family that make them prisoners of war of the imams. The birth of a child needs an imam. The death of a grandfather needs an imam. The wedding of your daughter, you need an imam. The imams and the clerics cut you off from these 3 points. You are left with not being invited to any wedding or any ceremony. Social outcast in a minority, whether you are Irish in downtown Toronto or Jewish in the early 20th century, in a tiny minority when you're a social outcast, you are dead. That risk few people want to take.
I'm going to have my numbers a little bit wrong here, so you correct me if I've got them wrong. But when you compare Islam to the 2 other major religions of the world, Islam came around like 600, 700?
7th century. Yeah.
7th century, okay. So 700 years, in other words, after Christianity, and maybe, what, like 2,000 to 3,000 years after Judaism?
Yeah.
So can we say that this is all part of the kind of typical growing pains of any religion? And the reality is, because you haven't been around as long as the other 2 faiths, in a way, it's totally normal.
But we were ahead of the 2 other faiths in the 10th and 11th century. I mean, Averroes and the great Jewish philosopher Maimonides, they were together in Spain. Both got their books burned by Jews and Muslims. And it is Muslims who were questioning even the existence of God. And Jews that would question the existence of God would find a place to hide in Turkey, Ottomans. We were ahead till the Imam said, thinking not allowed over here. Anybody who thinks is a heretic. The Catholic Church has a wonderful heritage in killing people who question their authority. Orthodox Jews have a tremendous tradition of internal battles going on over these very issues. We had it, we lost it because the Ottomans never wanted the printing press to come to Istanbul or Constantinople. We lost 200 years of printed material.
Well, I was going to say, it's taken hundreds of years to get to a situation which has left you, if I may say, in despair, so much so that you have written, I mean, really, a brilliant cri de coeur, if you like. How many more years do you think it will take before the Islamists are a tiny minority that are insignificant in the world, and your views are the ones that are in ascent?
November 2008, it will start when George Bush will leave the White House. He is the biggest ally of the Islamists, the Iranians, and the Saudis. Let Obama come over there, and he'll deal with these guys.
And if it's McCain?
He too, but I'm an Obama type, you know.
That doesn't surprise me either.
Yeah.
Let me read the title of the book again. 10 years in the making. It's called Chasing a Mirage, The Tragic Illusion of an Islamic State. Tarek Fatah has been our guest. Thanks so much for visiting us at TVO tonight.
Thank you.